We don't want to be here all day, so we better get moving. Good morning. For those of you that don't know, my name is Eric Simonson. I'm a lobbyist with Flaherty and Hood. Coming into this session, I had the opportunity to work with the Economic Development Committee for the coalition. We'll talk about some of those policies a little bit later this morning in our membership meeting. But we wanted to take a little bit of time and talk to you about a concept that we sort of visited at the summer conference. It's a new idea. It comes out of Southwest Minnesota. And if you wonder who the brains are behind everything that I'm going to talk about here, they're sitting right out here at this table. So definitely, if you have further questions about how this works or how it might work in your community or where the heck the idea came from, those are the guys that you want to talk to. It's been an absolute pleasure working with all of you. And this team up here that we're going to hear from here in a few minutes, it's been good and it's been fun. Thinking outside the box about how we deal with workforce retention in some areas of our state. Clearly, Minnesota is different depending on where you go if you look through the lens of what your workforce actually looks like. And how you grow that workforce, how you retain that workforce, really recognition of the fact that a lot of our workforce challenges in some areas boils down to a lack of population. So we're going to talk about this new initiative that these folks came up with that we tried to push at the legislature last year. The first thing I'll tell you is that you won't see this in our CGMC policy list, which we will review here shortly, a little bit later this morning, but hopefully we get to that point, right? I mean, we've introduced this last session as a pilot project for Southwest Minnesota with the full intent of trying to solve some of the challenges that they have. And in addition, we can hopefully lay some groundwork and get some good data about how we might work to solve some of the challenges in other parts of the state. So our real brief agenda here that we're going to cover here in the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to talk about a report that came out of the Center for Rural Policy and Development back in 2018 and 2019. There's some good data in there to kind of support this initiative. We're going to talk a little bit about South Dakota and a program that they have over there. It's called Build Dakota Scholarship Fund. We're going to talk about the idea that came out of the Southwest Minnesota Council of Mayors. And we're going to talk about how we kind of transferred that into a legislative initiative during the 2022 session. Talk about some opportunities and challenges that we would have going forward should we, in the event that we want to pursue this initiative again. And we're going to have a brief panel discussion with a couple of experts here from Southwest Minnesota who I'll introduce here in a little bit. We talked a little bit about this report that came out of the Center for Rural Policy and Development. And I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with this group. They do really great work. They put out a lot of good information, very in-depth, good researchers, just good folks to work with. And Kelly Ash is the one that did a 4-part research project on finding work is the problem, or is it really finding workers that's the problem? And what he identifies in that report, these are just a few of the concepts that come out, some of the high points, is that the workforce in greater Minnesota is barely growing. Not a big surprise to most of you. There are certainly pockets of greater Minnesota that are doing very well. We recognize that, but not all of greater Minnesota is the same. Our total labor force is projected to drop about 3% by 2030, which isn't that far off if you think about it. Something that we need to be thinking about and be concerned about. And some of the solutions that were put forward in Kelly's report include sort of tapping into some of our hidden talent pools, whatever they may be, based on where you are. Continuing our efforts and our work to increase immigration and in-migration, and how do we retain our youth? And this retention of youth is not a new thing. This is something that's been talked about for decades, really, especially in rural Minnesota. And we're going to get into that a little bit. So it's not necessarily unusual for Minnesota to steal ideas from other places, right? I mean, this is one way that you want to find good policy. You can go out there and look and see what's working in other states. And in this particular case, and especially with the folks in Southwest Minnesota, we're in direct competition with the state of South Dakota. Here's what South Dakota is doing. They created this Build Dakota Scholarship Fund. based on their high demand for skilled workers, which weren't necessarily coming out of South Dakota. They created this in 2015 with two contributions. One was a $25 million gift for Jamie Sanford, who pretty much owns South Dakota, I think. Certainly has the ability to afford that. And another $25 million contribution from the South Dakota Future Fund. South Dakota Future Fund is like the governor's slush fund, for lack of a better term. Interestingly enough, and kind of compare this to all of the legislative work that we do to try to get policies across the finish line, this whole program was created without any legislative involvement in South Dakota. That is kind of highlighting the stark differences between how policies are done in our two states. But this initial $50 million provided over 1,900 students with a debt-free entry into the South Dakota workforce. It's a pretty big deal for them, and it's been very effective and very popular. In 2020, another $20 million was invested to continue for another 5 years, and the rest of the money that keeps this program going came from private contributions from private employers that really wanted to secure a future workforce for their companies. South Dakota is different than Minnesota in many, many ways, not the least of which is how many technical colleges that they have. They only have four in the whole state. So I think we're dealing with 7 just in southwest Minnesota in that particular region. But basically their program exchanged for a 3-year full-time work commitment in a field of study in South Dakota. So we will pay you to go to school, cover all your tuition, all your costs, anything related to that program that you're going through. In exchange, we expect you to work here in South Dakota for 3 years. With the idea being that if somebody stays in a full-time job for about 3 years, that number, they start to get comfortable in what they're doing, they start to get engaged in their community, they start to become established, maybe they get married, maybe they start a family, maybe their spouse gets another job. By the time 3 years rolls around, there's a good chance that that person's going to stick around for a while, and that's good for the company, it's good for the community. They opened it up to out-of-state residents and all ages, so they didn't just build this for South Dakota. There was good intention about bringing people in from other places. Southwest Minnesota was a clear target for that. We talked about the fact that some employers actually pay for a portion of the training, and approximately out of this fund comes about 300 to 400 scholarships per year. So it's well used. This is a short video, really short, about how the program actually works in South Dakota. I think it's worth watching, so let's see if this will work.
When employers think of workforce recruitment, they normally think of one path: post a job on a job board, wait for applicants, and hopefully fill the position. But it isn't the only way. There is another path to recruitment, a way to create your own workforce with the exact skills your business needs. If you've struggled to attract and retain talent, or if you're tired of advertising positions but not finding the right applicants, the Build Dakota Scholarship is a solution for you. By partnering with the Build Dakota Scholarship, you can create a steady stream of talent from technical colleges. It's the best workforce opportunity to ever knock on your door, for students and employers. The Build Dakota Scholarship connects people to the thousands of long-term careers that exist right here in our state. That's how we can fill the skills gap and create success for South Dakota. Here's how it works. Students get a full ride scholarship to one of 4 South Dakota technical colleges. They get their tuition, fees, books, and tools paid for. And while it's a full ride, it's not a free ride. Their commitment as the recipient is to work in South Dakota, in their field of study, for 3 years after graduation. Then, after 1 or 2 years of classes, they're ready for a rewarding career. This scholarship is for everybody who qualifies. Anyone interested in high-need careers can apply. That's the background. Here's where employers come in. Scholars can earn their scholarship in 2 ways. The first is to apply and hope to be awarded through the general application process. The second way to get a Build Dakota Scholarship is for the student to have an industry partner. An industry partner is a business in their chosen field that pays a portion of program expenses. The scholarship pays the rest. In return, the student signs a contract to work at that partner business for 3 years after graduating. Businesses get a cost-effective way to upskill current employees or build their stream of talent from South Dakota's 4 technical colleges. With their 3-year commitment, the scholar gets trained for free and has a career waiting for them when they're finished with school. The goal of this workforce initiative isn't to throw money at a problem and hope it goes away. The purpose of the Build Dakota Scholarship is to build working relationships to benefit all of South Dakota. By joining forces, businesses and technical colleges can fill South Dakota's workforce gap. Together, we can accomplish more than we ever could apart. When we keep our workforce in the state, we're building stronger businesses and stronger communities. So how do you get started? Evaluate your current workforce and connect with a workforce expert at a South Dakota technical college. The college will work with you to identify your needs. They can bring you candidates or work to upskill your current workforce. The best part of it all is that the program is proven to work. Every year, Build Dakota graduates have a 98 to 100% placement rate. Don't wait. Start building your workforce today. For more information about the program and eligible industries, visit BuildDakotaScholarships.com.
Well, I'll start talking while somebody comes.
Yeah, here we go.
So you can see in South Dakota that it's relatively been what we would call an effective strategy. With a 98 to 100% placement rate, that's good policy. So the question, we take that kind of concept, move it over to Minnesota, where we have government that wants to be involved in just about everything, and come up with a policy that works. And that's where these folks came in. This is the Southwest Minnesota Council of Mayors, came to us probably about a year ago, I suppose, with the idea and said, hey, we've got this problem in our communities. We see, migration of Minnesota residents going to South Dakota to participate in this program. We're losing people. We don't necessarily have a jobs availability problem, more so than we have just an availability of people to fill those workforce needs. So they kind of brought the concept to us. We kind of workshopped it for a while, trying to figure out how we could take that idea and put it into the form of a bill that perhaps could pass the legislature. And that's kind of what started our work. So we proposed a pilot program that was somewhat modeled after Bill, with some nuances that were necessary to try to get this thing passed in Minnesota. And the mayors brought forth, what they thought, and rightfully so, were 5 targeted occupations that training was provided by Minnesota West campuses in their area and had high demand with their employers. And those occupations were carpentry, plumbing, HVAC, auto tech, mechatronics, and ag, diesel, and automotive. Their proposal kind of worked around some numbers that kind of figured that tuition payment was going to be about $8,000 a year for a 2-year program. They liked this idea of a 3-year work commitment in targeted industries. And our request, or their proposal for a request to the legislature, was for about $600,000 a year for a 5-year pilot program that would have been matched with $150,000 in local funds. It would have been a good initiative to just kind of get off the ground, get this program working, get some data back, and see how it was going to work. So a total state investment of about $3 million, and with the size of the surplus that we were dealing with in 2022, it didn't seem outside the realm of possibilities. So we took this concept and tried to figure out, how do we form this into legislation? What's going to work? Who all needs to be involved? You all know that when you bring forward a proposal to the Minnesota legislature, that there's 852 groups that always want to weigh in on what you're doing and offer you some advice, right? Who needs to be involved on the front end? How do we kind of stop some of those conversations from happening? What are our opportunities? What are our challenges? And how do we draft this legislation? So we chose to run this, or to try to run this through DEED. And those of you that are involved in economic development with the coalition understand that DEED by far is our most effective agency in the state of Minnesota when it comes to getting work done for greater Minnesota communities. So while you might think of this as an education-oriented concept, running it through DEED seemed to be the most effective way for us that we could see going forward. So we chose to write the bill with DEED being kind of the pass-through agency for monies to get out to folks that could actually do this work. The Southwest Initiative Foundation came to mind right away. They have, and you'll hear more about this from Scott, but they have an excellent working relationship with DEED already. They know the workforce challenges. They do this work every day. It seemed to be right up their alley, and most importantly, they were on board. They understood what was trying to be done, and they liked the concept, and they were in agreement to work with all of us. Minnesota West, right, is a component of MnSCU, or Minnesota State, they call it now. These are two-year colleges located in southwest Minnesota. Their president was 100% on board with this concept. I cannot say that for all higher education institutions across the state. We never had a blink of an eye from Minnesota West and their president, and it was comforting knowing that we were going into this process with them on board. We wanted to use the existing workforce development organizations because these are the folks that are spending time trying to figure out where the needs are, what the demands are, and what jobs and what programs actually should be a part of this concept. And then, of course, there's the whole employer side, right? Employers are the ones with the demand. They want to see programs put into effect at work. They're willing to pay for things that are going to be effective. And how do we quickly get the employers on board? It's by working with the Minnesota Chamber. And if you came to the summer conference, you probably heard the presentation from the Chamber that have, at this point now, come around to saying this is a good idea, we should get behind it. So the 2022 legislative session, we had a Senate file, we had a House file, we had excellent chief authors with Senator Weber on the Senate side and Representative Hamilton in the House. Representative Hamilton, of course, has since retired, but Senator Weber is still around, and I'm sure is going to continue to be a strong supporter of this program if it moves forward. We had many meetings with individual legislators and, of course, with DEED and DEED staff, trying to figure out how we were going to do this and that we were serious about moving this along. You know, keeping in mind that there are many thousands of bills introduced every session with somebody's best idea in the world. You want to make sure that yours rises to the top, of course. And while we didn't have the best reception in the DFL-controlled House, we did have a good reception in what was then the Republican-controlled Senate. And the concept actually made it to the final negotiations in the omnibus jobs bill. And I'm 100% confident that had that bill had passed the legislature, your concept would have been it. As we all know what happened at the end of the session, most bills did not pass, including the omnibus jobs bill, and that's unfortunate. So going forward, we've got a number of opportunities, and of course there's always going to be some challenges, but our opportunities are pretty clear at this point. We have a legislature, I should say, that has a much more broader understanding of the workforce challenges in greater Minnesota. Now, problem being, we've just turned over a significant amount of the legislature, right? So with 60-some new people coming in, we've got some work to do on the education side. But I know that folks that have been involved in the Jobs Committee in the past, and that will be continuing on going forward, will still have an understanding of what some of the challenges are that we're trying to fix. We have a very metro-oriented majority, especially in the House. And it's important for them to understand that their workforce challenges are very different than what we're seeing in parts of greater Minnesota. And getting that message across has been difficult. We will have, as you know, a significant budget surplus. We don't need to talk anymore about that. I mean, $10 million is $10 million. Minnesota West is continuing to be on board. They want to participate. They want to see this thing pass, and they want to start moving in the right direction. We have SWIFT here, of course, continues to want to participate. We'll hear more from Scott in a few minutes. We have our workforce development boards up to speed with what's happening and what the idea was, what the concept is, willing to participate. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, the Minnesota Chamber is willing to participate as well. We won't see a scenario in 2023 like we did in 2022, where the legislature just walked away and did nothing, right? We have a constitution that says that they have to pass a budget. They can't walk away without doing that. I'm not saying it has to be on time, but they do have to pass a budget in 2023. And that means that there will be vehicles for policy ideas like this one to pass. Our challenges, and these are not insignificant challenges, Office of Higher Education. This is probably our primary opposition to the idea for this, probably two reasons. One, they believe that programs such as this should be run through the Office of Higher Education instead of, we all think that's very problematic, knowing full well that you want to kill a program, the best way to do it is to send it to the Office of Higher Education. Not super effective, not really dialed in on the whole jobs factor, not really dialed in on the economic growth challenges in greater Minnesota. There is a number of reasons why you would not want to do that. So we've got to figure out how to change that way of thinking. Now that we know that Governor Walz has been reelected, and the commissioner of OE will still be around, we've got some work to do there. As I said, Representative Hamilton has since retired, who was a great champion for the idea. We'll have to find a new House author, which I'm sure won't be hard, but again, starting out with somebody new that's not necessarily as senior as Representative Hamilton was, will be a challenge. And then, of course, competition for funds. I mean, everybody is going to be asking for money. From state agencies to outside groups, you know, that $10 billion surplus will probably be spent 3 or 4 times over, just by the number of asks that will come in. So there'll be challenges with competing for funds. So I wanted to kind of bring together a couple of folks that are from Southwest Minnesota that are directly involved with this concept to talk to you about, you know, some of the work that they do, what they see around workforce in terms of what's currently going on, what some of the prospects are going forward. So we brought today for you, we've got Carrie Bendix here. She's the Executive Director of the Southwest Minnesota Private Industry Council. And we've got Scott Marquardt, who is the Senior Vice President of the Southwest Minnesota Initiative Foundation. Both are very experienced, both are very knowledgeable, both are great to work with. And I think going forward, if you have any questions, you can always count on reaching out to them and getting the answers that you're looking for. I'm going to start off with a couple of questions for these folks, and we'll just kind of get the conversation moving, if you will. The first question, I guess, is for the both of you. Maybe you can go first. Current trends in the workforce needs and the developments in Southwest rural Minnesota. Just talk about, you know, what is changing and where do you see potential new challenges, maybe looking ahead for 5 years or so.
Sure, thank you. Well, as was mentioned in the earlier presentation, our unemployment rates are at record lows. I mean, we set the record, the national record, on record, for the lowest unemployment rate ever that since it has started to be recorded. In Southwest Minnesota, our unemployment rate for October was 1.5%. Compared to the state, that is at 2.1%. We have one county that's unemployment rate was 1.1%. That's really an indication more of a real labor shortage. It's very significant. So being able to retain our workforce is increasingly becoming more and more important. We're also seeing that labor participation rates are coming back, but they're coming back very slow. We're seeing the youth unemployment or labor participation rates coming back faster, actually, than maybe overall. So they are a group of folks who want to work. They're seeing the higher wages and they're wanting to get engaged. One thing to keep in mind is the youngest baby boomers are going to be retiring or turning 65, I should say, in 2029. So we're in this time now where baby boomers are retiring and they'll continue to retire. So really looking at our future workforce is going to be increasingly important. We have a net loss of residents in Minnesota, and the net loss is primarily coming from our young people. So targeting or looking at how to retain our young people is really one of the workforce strategies that Southwest Minnesota has been working on for the last few years. We're seeing schools. It used to be that schools would promote the only way to a really great career, or one of the best ways to a really great career, is to get your 4-year degree. But we're seeing now in the labor market that 2-year degrees in IT, in healthcare, 2-year RN, they're making much more money and having a great career path than many of the 4-year degree programs. For example, the plumber is making more with a 2-year degree 4 years after graduation than the individual who has a 4-year degree in engineering. So it's really important that we really look at all the career opportunities that are available and promote all those opportunities for our youth. Career and technical education in the high schools is another trend that in Southwest Minnesota, there's a whole coalition of partners working to increase. And that's more than just the trades, more than just carpentry and plumbing. That includes healthcare, that includes positions in manufacturing, such as welding, mechatronics. Introducing careers in manufacturing has been an area that we promote. CDL is one of those areas that is usually one of the top occupations in demand, but you can't get a tuition assistance to help you with CDL training. That funding for training has to come from another place. So these are just some of the trends that we're seeing and working on in Southwest Minnesota.
Scott, same question.
Thanks, Eric. This may be a broken record from stuff you've heard from everybody else, but housing and childcare continue to be the conversations that we have with folks regarding workforce, and also something I want to talk about with what Carrie talked about with career and technical ed. What we're hearing from K-12 principals and superintendents especially is that as they want to get more involved in the career pathway space, it's having that time and capacity, and basically somebody who can be that intermediary interpreter, translator between business, K-12 education, and parents. And there's a lot of models of that, depending on your community. Hutchinson has a person in their school district who's assigned fully to do that, and she's very successful at it. There's one model I want to throw out. It's Windham, Worthington, and Jackson. Their school districts have a combined shared position housed at Carrie's office, a work and learn coordinator. What we heard from the principals in those communities is that was the most important thing for them to be able to do that pathways work, because it's somebody to engage with business, with parents, with communities, and it's proven to be very effective. My point here is that all of you that have economic development groups in your communities, if the school or the chamber talks about forming some type of career pathways person, work and learn coordinator or something, that's a key role that local government could play to support those pathways efforts. And from what we've seen in Hutchinson and Windham, Worthington, Jackson, Marshall, Minneota's had one. I know that person's transitioned, but where we've seen it happen, it's been pretty effective. Something else that's come up, again, if I may, Eric, just chime into what communities can do. I was at a presentation a couple of weeks ago that Chad Adams did. He was the former city manager at Albert Lee and is now the head of Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership. And he was talking to folks new to economic development about what you can do to help support housing at the city level to foster workforce development. And some of the things he said will be obvious to all of you, like look at your TIF and your tax abatement, your fee waivers, obvious stuff that you all know. But what he's seen throughout southern Minnesota that's been very interesting from city response to workforce housing is old school land assembly, clustering available infill lots. That's been a challenge for some communities. He's encouraging cities to look at your land assembly, and if you're gathering lots together, he certainly recommending communities look at local housing trust funds. That's becoming a trend in Minnesota. I know those, I think Red Wing was one of the big leaders in that, but throughout even smaller communities about, do you have a housing trust fund? certainly convening your realtors, your builders, and your developers and investors together on things. Housing studies has always been an interesting topic. We know that's on everyone's minds. How often do you do it, etc. If you're in my region, please call. There's funds available to help with housing studies. If it's not realistic for you to do a housing study, do you at least have intel and data from your realtors and apartment owners and stuff in town? I'll put a shout out to Renville County. I see Shane over there. That's my largest geographic county, pretty wide between Sacred Heart and Buffalo Lake. Their largest city is Olivia, roughly over 2,000 people. They have 10 towns. Not feasible for 10 towns to do a study. They did a county-wide one, but because it was such a big county, they basically chunked it into 3 vertical sectors because it's 3 different markets, and that was a pretty effective way for communities to engage in that space too. I know we're running low on time, Eric, but just one other thing I want to put a shout out to addressing housing, childcare, all of these things is local capital. And I'm going to shine a light on Pipestone right now. The local business leaders in Pipestone, Wilmer, Worthington, I know of a number of these funds, but I see Myron. Pipestone formed Pipestone Development Company. It was a group of locals that basically said, we want to use capital that we made in our community to do great things in the community. And not just old school angel stuff looking for the next widget or the next software app, but investing in buildings, in real estate, retail. They just had their 3rd round. Pipestone, I think, has 4,200 people. They've raised $4.6 million out of 3 rounds. That's $1,100 a head of local residents. Impressive math. And they're doing stuff. They're building multifamily housing. They've done a restaurant a retention project, a child care retention project, at least 1 retail, and a ton more. The role of the city, in no way, shape, or form should city government, I'm an ex-city employee, no way should city be the owner or leader of this, but you can be the catalyst and the shoulder tapper. Find 1 or 2 private business people who believe in your community, who believe in the workforce, and want to do it. And I think Pipestone's a shining example that you don't have to overcomplicate it, and they're getting stuff done. And other communities are too. So that's what I want to chime in on. If you want to support stuff like the scholarship program and stuff, get the locals together, get that capital, and I think it's a pretty beautiful story that's coming out of this.
Thanks, Scott, and I 100% agree with everything that you're saying, and I think it's important that we all kind of hear that and digest that as we go back to our communities and figure out what we can do. And with the understanding that economic growth is really what kind of drives a lot of our agenda here, but workforce development is one component of how we kind of move the needle on economic growth. And, Scott, you kind of answered my second question there, but Carrie, I want to give you a chance to weigh in on this. You work with various cities and government organizations and workforce and economic development issues. And just kind of weigh in on what advice you can give cities across greater Minnesota about how to get involved and actually move the needle on economic growth, right? It's something that we all talk about, and sometimes it happens accidentally, sometimes it happens naturally, but how can folks like this in the room here actually do that?
Yeah, I think workforce development, is, one side of the coin. Economic development is the other. I think they're very intertwined. And with our labor shortage right now, I really encourage your cities to think about your workforce development strategy as a whole, in partnership with not only your chambers, but your economic development, your regional development commissions, and your workforce development boards. Our workforce development board is consisted primarily of private sector members, but it has our president of our technical college, our provost of our 4-year college, we have secondary and ABE, we have all the education providers there, we have union reps, we have community leaders. So work with your workforce development board. We're charged with our federal grant to create a workforce development strategy in the area. In the packet, there's information on who your director is for your workforce development area. But work together, not one entity alone, I think can accomplish what needs to be accomplished. to address our workforce development challenges. That would be my first thing, is work together, reach out. My second is to really help your employers know what resources are available to them. There's federal and state resources, there's incumbent worker training, the dollars to train up and skill up their existing workforce, and really work with your employers. The other thing too, that as I was driving up here, I was thinking about, is retention of your workers. There's a lot of bonuses. Have you all seen the hiring bonuses out there? And what's happening is the employees who are most loyal to your company are kind of getting left behind or forgotten or not appreciated. So think about and encourage employers around retention bonuses, as well as, or a retention plan, as well as the hiring bonuses, that you're spending time building trust with your employees, that you're spending time listening to them. And also there's really generational differences. What the Generation X, what my generation wants is very different than what the upcoming millennials want. I was in a meeting and there was a millennial in that meeting, and he was like saying, well, what does this city have to offer me? You know, outside of employment, what kind of fun activities, what kind of things is there for me to do in the city that would draw me or want me to stay here? So I just encourage you to think about that. A lot of times cities will have festivals and activities that are very family friendly, but that generation that doesn't quite have a family yet, kind of keep that in mind. So those are all kind of factors you probably want to look at as you develop in partnership your workforce development strategies for the area. This particular proposal is one of those workforce development strategies that we have in our area, coupled with a lot of the career and technical education opportunities we want to present to our youth in the hope that there would be better retention. And a recent study from DEED just came out showing that career and technical education in the high schools, coupled with work-based learning, opportunities for students to actually work with your local employers, increases workplace or workforce retention. So I think it's a great direction to go in, and it's something for your particular cities to maybe look at in partnership with your regional partners.
That's good, thank you. I'm going to have one more question for Scott, and then we're going to kind of open it up for a few minutes that we have left for other questions. And Scott, so you work specifically with the Initiative Foundation, Southwest Initiative Foundation. And as we all know, there are several Initiative Foundations located across the state. Much of your work, I'm sure you would agree, is attributed to a collaboration between a variety of entities every single day. But in your mind, what is the number one thing the legislature could do or improve on to further enable the Initiative Foundations to do their work in the communities across Minnesota?
Thanks, Eric. We're grateful for all the capital that the state of Minnesota has trusted in us, especially during the pandemic relief grants, the loan guarantees. Those have been transformational in getting dollars out. We know a lot of those, what do they say, that build the plane as they fly it, so it's not perfect, but they had to get it out. We were formed in 1986. We're at unprecedented demand for loan funds right now. We've never been more deployed, and that is a story of hope in my mind, the amount of businesses in Southwest Minnesota that want to do stuff, manufacturing expansions, hospitality expansions, new startups. I think that's very hopeful. So bringing that cash in, I'm going to probably answer that with something very small, especially for those of you that are border towns or have access to legislators that get into the weeds on things. Again, I'm not saying this is going to happen again, but during the pandemic, as I said, we're grateful for the dollars, but sometimes when these rules for the state money gets put into statute, it gets very hard to fix and people get tossed on technicalities. So my hope is that some of the technicalities or rules can be more flexible. And here's two real examples in the interest of time. If, pick on Steve Robinson, if Steve Robinson had a hair salon and it's been in Worthington's Main Street for 15 years, He did everything right. His business was totally kicked in the gut from the pandemic. If his Secretary of State filing would have lapsed 2 days before March 1st, 2020, we had to deny him his relief grant. Now, enough people were denied on that the legislature got enough feedback where dollars were found to fix that, but that's my point of an unintended consequence of people that were years and years, sorry Steve, picking on your gray hair there. Okay, all right, thanks. Another one, yeah, thanks Chad. Another one just on a technicality, and this one kind of, I'll pick a different city, but let's say a brother and sister owned a restaurant in Ortonville. All the jobs, all the tax base, all the activity was in Minnesota. Brother lived in Ortonville, but sister lived on the family farm in Big Stone City across the river. We had to deny that grant because it wasn't 51% owned by Minnesota residents, even though all the tax-based jobs and activity were in Minnesota. Again, those may be into the weeds, but it's a technicality that for the border town folks, or those that are within an hour of a border town, or excuse me, of the border, businesses that really needed that capital were hurt. So my point is, I don't want to, say I want everything, but, the flexibility to be able to just kind of stop and look at some of those technicalities so that all of your businesses don't get dinged and we have to toss them. But more money is needed because people want to do stuff.
People want to do stuff and it costs money, and those are good points.